hodem Indigenous Amekadodam Kamistapon and Dunche Inom Home.
Kwe, Dliwis, Jeremy Dutcher, Naga Duje au Nigotkok, Ulustawiak.
Growing up, the language was spoken, the Ojibwe language was spoken every day in the house. Like when we'd have family over, aunts, uncles, grandparents, close friends of the family, they were all fluent Ojibwe speakers. So we heard it all the time. I come from a family of 7, so I'm right in the middle. There's 3 older, 3 younger. My oldest sibling, is totally fluent in the language. The second one was fluent until she went to school. And then after that, then the language was stopped. The Ojibwe language was basically stopped being spoken, to the children. But it was all spoken in the house amongst all the adults.
We had the opportunity in high school to switch out of French and go into Maliseet language, which I decided to do. And that was really the only experience I had. Our elementary school and our reserve provided like the language, teaching it, which is also taught by my aunt. But if we went to the school off reserve, we weren't allowed to take it. We weren't allowed to take Maliseet language.
Being from New Brunswick, I've witnessed this in real time, where people my age and young people don't care about their language because they need to be worried about French if they want to get a job working in the province, in like a government or like a lot of sectors. So yeah. Anyway, so I see that the way that those structural things privilege certain languages over others, and I think there is a symbolic good in maybe acknowledging that there were, and continue to be many different languages on this continent.
I grew up grass dancing and drumming, so I've always been kind of connected to it through music and arts. My grandmother spoke it a lot, but she didn't really pass it on to my mom because unfortunately she was in Indian day schools, so she wasn't really encouraged to speak her own language.
So she would tell me these stories about like walking into rooms, like her uncles and aunts and her mother were always like storytellers, and so they would like be around the table telling stories in the language and stuff, and she was obsessed with that because she would always go and like listen to them. But at a certain point they would, like, as soon as the kids would enter the room, they would switch. And like by no means were they good at English, but they would tough it out because they didn't want the kids to pick the language out.
I often wear that myself, because when you look at other cultures as well too, the parents speak their language to their children. That. So yeah, so I wouldn't really have an answer to that as to why my mother stopped speaking it directly to us. I wish she had though.
They said, it's better if you don't know the language because you'll have more opportunities in life. So there was a real sense of like stigma around speaking the language and like passing it on to the generations.
So when I was a kid, the older people in my family whispered in Ojibwe. It was the late night conversations and out in the bush. Sometimes it would slip out and they would be very secretive about the language, except I had one uncle who he was very dark-skinned and my family's a little lighter skinned, and so he was the janitor at our school, and my family told me to never admit that he was our uncle. Don't tell anyone, pass as white. I didn't talk, I didn't speak any English, like I refused to talk. So whenever there were group activities that required the children to talk, they would put me out in the hallway and I'd have to sit on a bench in the hall while the kids were playing some kind of game that involved singing or talking or whatever. And so this beautiful janitor would come and sit with me, and he would only speak to me in Ojibwe. And I think that old man, even though there was so much shame around who he was as my uncle, he was the kindest person in my life as a child. And he didn't speak a single word of English to me ever. He'd do magic tricks and tell me funny stories. So that's the greatest impact. So I guess buried under all of the shame and loathing and internalized hatred for being Native that my family and my grandmother, who went to residential school, they all carried around with them. It was a palpable tension in our family. That was the one person who didn't have any of that.
Que j'aime na do mi gwetchkin ha ke go la mi shian.
The residential school survivors, when after they finished schooling in residential schools, they left the residential schools, very confused, about their culture. Because during their entire time in these schools, they were told not to speak their language. They were told a lot of awful things about their culture, saying that it was bad. That. So essentially, these young children were essentially brainwashed. That. So when they became adults, the impacts it had on them was to avoid being recognized as Indigenous people. Some of them were, they hid it. They didn't self-identify. They didn't speak their language. They didn't speak the language to the children. And these are all impacts of the residential school system and ultimately colonization.
The non-Native students arrive in class and they've studied and they've, they just have, they seem to pick it up faster than the Native students. And it wasn't until I adopted the boys that I realized how much trauma impacts learning. And I realized that also, that seemed to be applicable to the Native students in my class as well. They were coming with so much shame and hurt and feelings of doubt, feelings like they're not Native enough because they don't speak the language, yet shame about speaking the language from their parents, and being shut down by other language speakers for not being good enough, for not speaking the right dialect or whatever. That they were arriving in class already triggered, and you can't learn when you're in your amygdala. You can't retain information.
We believe anyway, like our language came from the earth, because all language does, because it's experiential and it's spatial, right? And so you speak what you see. Our language is literally around us, right?
One of the difficulties I face is respecting that I'm also a settler in this territory. This is not my land. This is Anishinaabe. Prioritizing that language over mine has been really difficult because there's events I do here that I would want to do in Maliseet, but it's not the region's Indigenous language, so that's a difficulty. And I grew up way in the bush, so we're in the middle of nowhere. You learn little things when you go on walks in the woods with your grandmother or grandparents that I don't have that opportunity here, so it's not even the same feel. It's not like I walk in the Don Valley woods and this doesn't feel the same as me walking home. I mean, I still have some pretty wild experiences with the animals too. The animals help a lot because I know certain animal names and not Maliseet, so when I see them I try and remember what they are. There's a few big Gilus around here. Those are skunks, so there's a lot in this area.
I think a big part of being connected to culture is being connected to the land, and personally, just because I'm not from here, I don't feel too connected to this land, so just being so far from home, it is difficult to find that connection. Just being home, just being on the nation that I'm from, we're surrounded by two rivers, just small things like that don't happen here. So it is kind of difficult. I don't really find too many new ways of being connected, unfortunately.
So in order to have substantive and meaningful language, learning and dialogue, it needs to be in relation to the place that it comes from, in my opinion. Yeah, because when I go to a forest, I don't call it a forest, I call it chico. Like there's, I experience it in a different way because I call it something different. There's that, I guess, that conflict between those two realities. I choose to live in Toronto because it's got things that rural New Brunswick doesn't have. In terms of like how I'm able to live, and that's really cool. And I love living in it. I love the energy of a city. I love the creativity of a city, and it really makes me excited. But at the cost of what, right? I'm not able to engage with my linguistic community as often or as frequent as I would like.
The first time that I actually met my mom, when I was in foster care, she kind of introduced, I didn't know what Ojibwe was because I was foster cared, and I went to 4 or 5 different homes, and when I saw her, she kind of spoke in a language that I didn't know, and was like, what kind of language is this? And then through the years, it's gotten a little easier to understand what she or other people are saying.
Mm-hmm. And I think when you asked me that, I said, it's your language.
Yeah.
Why is the language important to you?
Because it's part of my culture, and learning it may help me understand other people when they speak in the language to me.
So if we can have our young people starting to pick up the language, that's great, because then when they grow up, they can continue that there with speaking the language to their children then. So I'm pretty optimistic because I could see a lot of the things that are happening in the revitalization of the language. It's only going to get better.
Yeah, that's my hope. Lots of great resources, and I'm hoping this record that I'm making is also another one of those resources. I know it's not going to be no one's going to learn a language from listening to my 11 songs, but I think, and what I've learned from elders in my community is that everything starts from musical place, and the music of everything in life is a seed for all beautiful things that spring from it.
I'm carefree what you do in your life. I will support you in whatever you decide to be, but the non-negotiable is that you serve your community. You carry that language and all that knowledge and pass it on.
And I would like to hope that within the next 10 years, maybe I'll have children, maybe I'll be able to teach them the language. That's what I'm hoping for, is that there's more programs and education offered in the language.
So you look back at, you always think about the treaties, right? The two row wampum. So we have the 2 different societies coexisting in 2 different canoes riding along, so not interfering with one another. And I think in preserving language, that's an important part of it.
This is one river here that we travel on, and it's about relationships. That I would never try to steer your boat. You would never try to steer my boat. That together we could take that journey called life, as if we kept the maintenance of our boats. And you could come into my canoe, G-Mani, yeah, Itapishan G-Mani, and you could learn all my stuff, and that's fine. You're welcome to visit in my boat. But you would never sit in my canoe and start taking it apart and make it look like yours.
Nolsum signaga kumosum sig. Uliwan chil ladaway walking in. Kizimanawaki of chil nilon uchtikich maludamanen. Chil wubazi it ledge. So that means the grandmothers and the grandfathers. Thank you for keeping and preserving our language, and it's now our turn to keep it safe for the ones that have yet to come. May that be the truth.